Okay. So again, thank you so much for coming. And I'd like to introduce everyone to Katy Barglow. I've known her for, I don't know how long ago I met you, but it was a long time ago, back in Poems Club. Yeah, and she was the trainer that took me to my first Prix St. George on her horse Leo, and then all the way to the Grand Prix level. My first Grand Prix was in your barn, and then you helped me on and off over the years, so this is great. And so if you want to introduce yourself further, everyone should have had your bio, and then we can get started.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Katy Barglow. I'm a large R judge. Yes, that means I can, I judge USCF shows through 4th level. I also judge a good number of horse trials. I've been accepted into the S program, which is the highest level of US judging. And if we ever get to, have horse shows again, I'll be doing that. I'm a Grand Prix trainer and rider. I run a small barn in the Martinez, and I also work a non-horse job. So I sort of have the 2 halves of my life. And as Megan said, I started teaching her when she was a kid on my Grand Prix master, who's still currently in the backyard, and thought it would be fun to get together and chat about judging.
Yeah, cool. So I started out with a few, so I've, just for participants' sake, I've got 13 questions lined up. I don't think we're gonna get through all of them. I'd like to give priority to if you guys have live questions or follow-up questions, just because some of these are mine because I didn't get tons of questions. But we're gonna start with a couple of general questions and then jump into some more specifics. So my first question for you, Katy, is what was your motivation behind becoming a judge? And throughout your judging years, what's been the most fun part for you, and then what has been the most challenging?
Yeah, I got involved, I think, for the same reason most folks do, and that's for the education, right? So as a rider and a trainer, it really helps to know, what the judge is looking for, right? And the more you understand that, the better of a rider and a trainer and a coach you can be. That's how it started. That was in about 2008 for me. There was a local, L program, and I said, hey, that would be a really good way to learn more about this, right? And then I took off from there. I discovered, it's challenging, it's exhausting, it's really mentally, a lot of mental work, but it's also very satisfying when it's, done well and you feel like you're, on your game and giving good comments and good scores. I've gotten, the education never stops. I think each of the further level up programs, I feel like I learn a huge amount, again, each time. And it's also, it's nice to feel like you're involved in the direction of the sport. It's a way to give back to the sport, to direct the riders and trainers and what they think is the correct direction. It's also a great way to stay involved. If I ever decide not to ride due to injury and so on, right? So it's a way you can really stay involved in the sport, even if there's a period where you're not actively competing yourself. Certainly no judges do it for the money. It's a pretty thankless job. You're never going to make back what you spend on the programs. It's really for love of the sport and the love of the process and the education and what you learn as you do it.
Great. Yeah, no, I've been really impressed with just the L program, the amount of learning that was going on. It was overwhelming, actually. And I was riding with an L faculty member for several years prior to it. So I felt like I was a little bit ahead of the curve. It was still a lot. So then what has been one of the more fun parts of judging? I guess you've kind of already answered that. And then what's the most challenging part, would you say, of being a judge?
So one of the most fun parts actually that I was surprised by was you get this group of colleagues that end up being really good friends. It's sort of a shared misery thing as you go through these programs, together, but you make really good friends in the process. That was one thing I was not, expecting, that I found, really fun. In terms of challenging, I really think a full 8-hour day of judging, especially the 3 days in a row, is about the most exhausting thing I do. And, I'm a PhD, right? Work in biotech, I do a lot of mental labor, but to give 30 scores and 30, good comments on 60 tests is an incredible, amount of focus and concentration. And you'll, at least I do, afterwards I'm mad at myself over, even a single score, that I think I got wrong. Out of the 1,000 I gave that day, I'll agonize over 1/6 that, it could have been a 7, right?
Oh,
The challenging aspect of it, I think. It's also why it's fun, right? I think it's the same thing that draws a lot of us to showing in, dressage. That quest for, making it better and better, I think applies as well to, all judges.
interesting. Yeah, I have not judged a lot, but it is exhausting. I think that my organizer said the hardest part about judging is deciding what to have for dinner that night.
We laugh that we get, decision fatigue, like after you've made, literally 1,000, decisions in the course of the day. Like, a menu at dinner is too much. Like, I can't make any more decisions today. I'm all done. I'm decisioned out. That's it.
I don't care. Bring me whatever you want. I will eat anything.
Yeah.
Great. So how has your judging education, you've already mentioned this, but how has that affected the way you teach, the way you ride, the way you prepare yourself or your clients for shows?
Yeah, so really, once you're a judge, you can never turn that off. You bring that eye to, everything you ride, everything you see, and you go, okay, that was a 7. What can I do to make that a 7.5, or an 8? And, you end up scoring yourself as you ride as well. Like both, like in the showing it at home, I'll feel it and I go, is that the 8 trot? And if not, what do I need to add, to make that trot the 8, right? Like I don't judge my clients like out loud a lot, but I always have that standard in mind. It helps me decide what tests to have them ride. It helps me focus in our lessons. What are the holes, what are the things that need to be improved. Also as a judge, you become much more aware of the details. How does the rider position affect the execution, of the movement? How does the use of the corners affect that shoulder in? So I bring all that now to my teaching in a way that I did not prior, to becoming a judge.
Cool. Okay. Here's one that I'm very curious about, because as I've been going through the L program, I've been told by multiple judges that every judge develops their own kind of methodology for deciding on scores. And I've just been told to wing it and figure it out for myself. So I keep asking people, like, if you could describe like kind of what goes through your mind as a judge, or, what sort of your methodology.
Yeah, so, they teach in the L program that it's a basics plus criteria and then modifiers, right? So what does that mean to me? Basics really comes down to, is the balance, the engagement, the energy, the connection suitable for the level, right? So I have a different sort of, expectation in my mind for, each level as to, what I'm, looking for. And those basics really come out, in the harmony of the ride. Does it look easy? Does it look, effortless? Does it look fun? Is this a horse that I would like to, get on and, get to ride? So that's really the way I think of the basics. And obviously, there's a ton of, details around that, but it starts from that, right? In terms of the criteria, it always starts from, can I recognize the movement? So if it's a shoulder in, can I tell, it's a shoulder in? Am I sort of going, is that horse just crooked or is that a shoulder in, right? And then, once that, it's, what are the sort of holes and gaps in the execution, and are they in the sort of the hard part or the essence of the movement? So for example, haunches in is really a movement about a bend. So if you're struggling with the bend, you're struggling with the essence of the haunches in. So that's a lower score than, say, a little variation in the angle and things like that, right? For modifiers, it really comes down to corners, preparation and, how you get in and, out of the movement. And that ties a lot again into this flow, harmony, and the, ease of the ride, the ease of the movement. That's a big question, I think, and I could talk
Oh, I know
40 minutes on it, but I think that's a kind of a overview of what goes through my head. Is first, is this horse a first level horse or a third level horse or a pre-St. George horse, and then is the movement clearly a shoulder in? Because that's sort of the simplest level of it, and then from there we break it down into smaller criterias, and then also in the comments we have to to focus on sort of the essence of what's good and what's lacking a little bit. So carries well but needs activity, shows bend but lacks engagement, right, and so on.
Great. This kind of goes over like a lot of the questions. I've done several like question and answer sessions on my own Instagram going through the L program. And then when looking for questions here, a lot of the questions are just very general, like, what do you want? What do you want us to do in the ring? And so if you like, there's a lot more specifics that we can jump into later, but if there's anything that you kind of want to say on like some of the most important things that the judge is going to be looking for, and then whether that kind of shifts for you or for the rider over the levels. Like, are you looking for something specific at training level that you're maybe looking to see change throughout the levels?
Yeah, I mean, really that's outlined in that thing at the top of the test, which is the purpose of levels. And I think a lot of riders never look at that. Like, I think, I probably showed through about fourth level as a kid until like I even realized that was on the test. I don't think I'm the only one, right? So if you haven't, take a look at the purpose of those levels, on top of the test. And also the writers of the test have, done a huge job to write in, every box, what are the criteria? Quality of the trot, quality of the bend, straightness of the hull. So yes, that's a really good starting point if you're sort of not sure, why your scores are, the way they are, right? Beyond that, I hit on the previous slide, it should look easy. Like, it shouldn't look like you're, yanking and carrying your horse, to the test. Your horse is barreling through it, right? It should feel, like it's not easy and you're sitting there doing nothing. We can work physically very hard, to make it look effortless. It's a sport, right? But it shouldn't feel like every movement, is a struggle. And then tied into that, I think it's the organization of the test and the prep for the movements, right? So riders make, look competent at their level are the ones that are using the corners, they're setting up and they're thinking ahead. So they're not cantering along, getting to A and slamming on the brakes to walk, right? But they're, sitting the horse down, half vaulting in the corner, shortening the stride, putting him in a little shoulder forward, and really setting the horse up for success in that transition. So that sort of level of organization, again, I think is a really important part, which folks who don't show a lot often struggle with.
Great. And so in the previous question, we talked a lot about the basics, which are of course incredibly important. In your years of judging, like, what do you see is missed most often in horses or in riders, with regard to the basics? Alternatively, like, what are some of the like misconceptions with the basics that you just think people are missing that you'd like to tell them before they come down center line for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the lower levels, I think the two most commonly missed things in the horses are energy and then symmetry and bend. So I see a lot of lower level horses that maybe bend left but don't actually bend to the right, or they over bend left, or their haunches into the right. And that's oftentimes related to a rider as well, who doesn't sit in the middle of the horse, who's crooked themselves. Horses are crooked, humans are crooked. We put two crooked things together and they get really crooked. So I see that all the time, especially with the horse trials as well. Really common. It's usually horses overbend left and are stiff right. I'd say 90% of them are in that category. And then in the riders in the lower levels, a a lot of times the riders don't quite yet have a true following mechanic of the gait, right? So that's in the trot, really, being able to sit in harmony with the horse. But, the walk and the canter, I'd say, are actually the ones, where I see most often, sort of a lack of understanding of, what the horse's head and the rider's elbows and hips should do to follow that gait and not, interfere. And that's also, related to with straightness. So, like I'll use a comment, sits against on the mechanic of the canter. That means really, the rider is sort of getting in the horse's way instead of helping. So at the lower levels, I'd say that along with, energy, right? So it's always this balance of the balance itself, with, energy, engagement, impulsion. All horses at the lower levels sort of have one or the other. They're forward, but not so balanced, or they're balanced, but not so forward, right? Upper levels, there's still some of that same thing. I think making our horses, symmetric in the half passes is always a challenge. Same thing in the changes. The upper levels tend to have more challenges with relaxation. Third level, and the flying changes, there's oftentimes some, tension and excitement as horses are learning the changes. Similarly, at fourth level with the pirouettes, again, as the demands get higher, it's harder to keep the relaxation and the suppleness and the flow of the test. Those are sort of some general trends that I've seen.
Interesting. Yeah, I can attest to exciting lead changes right now as I'm putting them on my horse.
Well, been there and done that.
Yeah. We're of course not showing anytime soon, but I was going to wait until he was less excited about doing them. So to sort of shift gears toward criteria, like test riding itself is a skill. And so, and I know with my students, it's something that we don't probably practice near enough, is some of these test riding elements. And so what are some instances that you may see in the show ring that makes you think that the rider needs to go home and practice the test a little bit more? And then also, like, what is your best advice for becoming a better test rider? So if you're going to send them home, what should they do?
A great question. I think the only way to really learn to ride tests is to ride tests. And I think a lot of folks are careful about, they don't want the horses to anticipate, they don't want them to learn the tests, so they end up, never really riding the tests at home. And that's actually really hard. So if you do have a horse who, anticipates, there's things you can do. You can ride the test in the wrong direction. You can do the canter work first and then the trot work. You can ride other tests at the same level. But if you never, ride tests and then you're shocked that it's, hard to ride tests, that, it sort of makes sense to me, right? And even if you're not, riding tests, so put the movements, together. So it's, one thing to do a good 8-meter circle. It's actually much harder to do it, out of a shoulder in with the correct amount of bend, right? You also see riders who, they can leg yield sort of, one time out of two at home if all the stars align, the horse is in a really good balance and going from one end of the ring, but not the other end. And that's really not enough to go show that. I'd say you need to be hitting 90% of the time that you can do a leg yield, even if there is a scary object outside the ring or you're going in a funny direction, prior to really showing it. And that's again where these patterns come in. Like a lot of times you can leg yield fine until you try to do it after a canter, say, or you can lengthen great unless you're doing it after the canter tour, right? So riding tests, riding these patterns of the movements, knowing the test again well enough that you can prep. Yes, that's a theme again, as you've seen already, for me, that you have to be organized enough in your mind to know what's coming up and set your horse up for success. So, and again, that's a skill that you really only get from riding tests. And you'll find it always comes up faster in the test than you think it should. And that's really like, even if you're an FEI rider, you'll still find do a training level, on a young horse. It feels like it comes up so fast, right? So it's really, the tests are, designed as a test of your training and your balance. So if you're having sort of tough times, with that, you've got to figure out sort of where the gaps in the training are, and then go home and really work on those.
Great. So I've received a question that I think I just have to really quickly read it. That right now might be a good time to jump into that. Okay, and so prior to coming down center line, you've got, you're going around the outside of the arena. One of the questions that I did get that I did not put on your sheet, so I'm putting it on the spot, is whether the judge wants to hear anything from the rider going around the outside of the arena, like before the bell is rung.
I mean, really, I don't think it matters. As a rider, I usually come by and tell the scribe my number in the test I'm riding. So not the judge, it's the scribe, just to make sure they have me on the correct test sheet, because it has happened where you start the test and you track left and they go, go right, and you're like, well, I'm riding first two, and they go, well, I have the first three, right?
Yeah.
So it's never a bad idea, but it's really, again, at the scribe and not the judge. So typically, if you're going around to the outside, the judge is still madly putting comments on the previous rider's sheet. So really, we're not paying any attention to you, at that point. It takes about 45 seconds at the end of the test, for us to do those 5 scores at the end, the comments on those scores, the further comment at the end, and only then you sort of look up, ring the bell and acknowledge the incoming rider. So it's fine to say good morning if you see them looking up, but there's no sort of obligation to talk to the judge either.
Yeah, I'll definitely second double checking what test you're writing, because I used to just double check my number, where I just read my number off to them as I went by, and they had the right number one time. This is at my my first intermediate two on Rico, and the judge has to stop me and says, I see that you're wearing a tailcoat. I don't think you're doing third level, are you? Like, no, I'm doing the I2. And she's like, okay, I'm going to need a different sheet. And so I got an extra, couple rounds around the outside of the arena. I don't know what happened, but I did think that from then on, I've said my number and then the test, so that they really, make sure. And so speaking of going around the outside of the arena, do you have any advice for like what the most efficient use of that time is? As the judge is writing comments, you're technically allowed to go into the ring after, I believe, the final halt. And so you're just killing time around the outside. What do you like to see? I mean, I know as a judge you're not looking, but what would you like to see your riders do, or what advice do you have?
Yeah, so, very important, the question, I think. So let me start with, my pet peeve as a judge is when riders come in at a slow walk, and they walk, and they walk, and you're trying to give them time, to see the arena, to come by the scary judges stand, but they're doing it at a slow walk, and you've got a schedule to keep. So, don't be that person, right? The key thing, I think, is, even if your horse is not spooky and they've, been there, a million times, you want to get around the entire ring once, because there could be a flower pot or a shadow or something funny, and you're giving away your chance to work through that, outside the ring. And again, if you come in at a walk, you're not going to have time. Judges are obligated to keep a fair playing field, so each rider gets put on the same amount of time. And again, if you walk, you're not going to make it around the ring, and you're going to get rung in around A or B or so, right? So come in at a gate where you can see the whole arena. Unless you check out the footing, for example, notice that it's harder at this end, or that the ring's a little bit downhill into this end, or there's a slippery patch of grass at this end, right? So you're throwing away a chance if you don't sort of get around the ring at least once, right? Beyond that, it really depends on the horse. A lot of my horses, I'll practice a few halts, either a canter halt or a trot halt trot. That's the first thing in the test. It doesn't hurt to tune your horse up. How's your straightness? How's the response to your leg aid, right? Horses who tend to get sort of backed off in the ring, a lot of times I'll go around to the outside in the canter, right? To sort of get them thinking forward. You can do a little lengthening in back. Some horses, that are a little hotter or lookier, will stay in the trot and do some, lateral work. And you can do shoulder and left, shoulder and right. You can do transitions, trot, walk, trot, little half steps or a piaffe for an upper level horse, right? So you have to know your horse, and again, have ridden the test enough at home, but to sort of feel, in that moment, what do you need? Do you need a little more impulsion? Do you need a little more half vault? Is it a time to address the straightness and really work on the bend to the right? So I think I can't give a generic answer for that beyond get around the ring once.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so again, tons of questions coming in for just like tips for improving scores, just in general. Like, we all want to score higher than we probably do right now. And so do you have any like quick tips or, something that you'd like to see riders clearly practice more at home, or, what do you wish you could tell every rider, like before they come down center line to see you? You're like, my God, please bend your horse.
So every test has a center line halt, right? And really from, you're coming right at the judge. So from C, what you really see is, is the straightness. So a lot of riders obsess over is the halts square, and they'll kind of kick and the horse meanders forward, right? From C, again, it's really about straight, prompt, fluid. That's a thing that at every level on any horse, you should be able, to nail those first center lines. I've already talked a lot about, use of corners and preparation. I think that's a huge one again, for scores. Another idea, like if you're not already doing this, read your test sheets and also track them, over time, right? So if you've done 6 tests at the first level, you've got a really good set of data, right? So take that, put them all side by side, in a spreadsheet or on a sheet of, paper, and then go, okay, what's my lowest average score? So of those 6 tests, look, the free walk is always the lowest, score in the test, or the leg yield left is always our lowest score, and that sort of tells you where the areas for improvement are, right? That said, it's also knowing your horse, right? So maybe you have a horse who doesn't have too much of a trot, lengthening at this stage, and you take a 6 on that, but he has really good lateral work. So your 7s really, it could be 8s, and you've seen the judges comment saying, steady bend, but it needs engagement. So that tells you then, where to focus to bring that 7 to the 8. But that's where I think showing the same set of tests across a few shows for several judges, really show you these patterns. It's a great thing in our sport that we get, feedback on every single movement of every single ride. So if you're smart, you can really use that to figure out where you're losing points and why, right? So it's a resource where too many riders look at their score and toss it in, a pile and never look at it, after that, right? So really, those test sheets are an amazing resource, after the fact as the season goes on.
Great. Yeah, I feel like I only started reading my tests like a few years after starting dressage, and I remember looking at them and going, oh, like they're literally telling me what they wanted to see to get my score up.
And as a judge how much thought and how much effort goes into every one of those comments in particular, right? So we really want the riders to use those. That's why we kill ourselves to come up with distinct but helpful comments, right? So your judges really are trying to help, so we take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I am realizing going through the program, is that it is so much easier to give a whole bunch of 8s and be like, you're amazing at this, than it is to give 5s and have to come up with those comments and all of that. Because previously, I just, I thought that it was all kind of the same.
The hardest area, is the 7, where you say you're doing it pretty well, but here's what you need for the 8. It's actually, I think that's the hardest test, not to score, but to give good comments on.
Good comments, yeah.
Easy to score that, right? But hard to give positive but still helpful comments.
Yeah, definitely. So I know that we've got eventers here, and I know that you've judged a fair amount of events in our area, in addition to just dressage shows. And so, could you talk a little bit about the differences in what you look for or what you tolerate in eventing dressage, if there is any difference? And then, for my benefit, as well as the eventers who are looking for the purpose of the levels on their tests, how do you judge an event test when there's no purpose of the levels?
Excellent question. So, really in terms of the judging and what, we look for, there's no difference, right? The things that are different in the eventing tests at the lower levels is the short court. So that's sort of the changes a little bit the flow of the rides, right? Everything comes up faster. There's much sort of fewer long straight sides. So in terms of, the riding of it, I think in some ways those tests are quite a bit harder than they look on paper, because there's just, not much time in between the movements, right? Really, more looking for the same things, basics, criteria, right? I'd say that, one thing I look for, maybe even a little bit more, in the eventing test, is the harmony and the communication between horse and rider. Like, if you think about it, we're sending these horses out, on cross country, on the next day, or later that day, and so the dressage is a test of obedience and communication, and it's our job as a judge to say if we don't think the horse is safe to go out on cross country, right? So that harmony, the flow is, I'd say, even more important, right? In terms of the purpose, really, you just match it, to the corresponding test.
Okay.
A novice is a training level. Training level of eventing is about first level test 1. The prelim is about first level test 3. Intermediates, second level, right? So basically we judge according to those same criteria for the level, and like I sort of use the purpose of those with that in mind. I'd say it's a little bit less about sort of expression and brilliance, and that's again related to two things. One, the short court, and two, a lot of times the footing is sort of not optimal in the same way. It's sand, or it's grass, and it's not sort of designed for horses to spring off the ground in quite the same way, right? So again, we're to me, a really good eventing test doesn't have to be brilliant, but it should be obedient, fluid, effortless, harmonious. And I've given a lot of big scores for tests like that.
Okay, interesting. Okay, speaking of big scores and springy horses, I get a lot of questions about like off breeds in dressage. There's people kind of start feeling disappointed that dressage scores depend so much on what they feel like can be purchased in terms of movement of their horse. And so what advice would you give for a rider who whose horse is not particularly talented, and who may be kind of disillusioned for going and competing against a horse that has an additional 0 at the end of their price range, or the price, and who may be scoring much higher on something that the rider can't control, like gaits?
Yeah, another great question, that one that we hear about a lot, right? So let me start by saying that I love quote unquote off breeds. I've got all kinds of stuff in my barn. My current string has a Palomino, Lusitano in there, as well as several warm bloods. I've got Andalusians, I've got thoroughbreds, right? So dressage is for every horse, right? It'll improve every horse. Judges have to judge what they see according to the standards. So the hard thing as a judge is that you don't know if the rider bought that horse as a 10 mover and has dumbed it down to a 7, or the rider bought that horse as a 5 mover and has taught it how to move for a 7. But there is however the horse moves naturally, there's huge things you can do as a rider to improve that. So I had a student 10 years ago with a horse who literally moved like a pony, right? No bend in his knees, totally stiff and straight. We taught him to passage, totally transformed his trot, and he went to NAJ YSC and did well, right? So, don't sort of let yourself fall into the trap of going, that's just how he moves, right? Keep working to improve the quality of the horse's gaits. It's it's cavaletti work, it's balance work, it's engagement work, it's hill work, it's strengthening work, it's, riding forward and, gymnastically riding. So you are your horse's, personal trainer, and that's what, the dressage is to make them more beautiful, more graceful, more athletic, stronger, right? So I think that's the key thing to keep in mind is, for me, it's never, really about trying to beat so-and-so and so-and-so horse. It's about, is my horse moving better than they were last year? Is my horse more supple, than they were last year? And that's the goal and the journey of this, is to take the horse that we have and make them better. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, my next one is that I got a couple of questions on moving up the levels and when to know. And so some riders just struggle, like, when do I move up? Is it a certain score that I need to earn? Is it, certain movements that I can do at home? And so, like, what have you seen in the court that makes you think that the horse and or the rider needed to stay at the previous level for longer? And then do you have any hard and fast rules for when, like, you move your riders up or when you move your horses up?
Yeah, so some folks have like a score criteria and say, you should be scoring X prior to moving up. I don't typically use that. Again, there are some horses that develop at different paces, and some horses, often like the more Iberian types won't really develop a true extension until they have more collection. So those horses may be sort of in the low 60s at first level, but be in the high 60s at third, right? Like as they get stronger. So for me, it really comes down to not what score are you getting at the current level, but how is your work at the higher level at home? Can you ride the higher level test with that harmony, with that flow? Does it feel easy, or is the horse still struggling with large chunks of it? And there are times take a horse in the ring with one movement that's not quite confirmed, but 90% of the test should feel like you can do it on a bad day. And that's the key too, is I think auto riders go, well, on a good day I can do a shoulder in, so I'm gonna ride second level, and I say you need to be able to do the test like even on your worst day. It's cold, it's windy, there are friends next door, or there's a squirrel running around in the trees. So if you can do the test on your worst day and still have it flow and feel relatively doable, then I think you're ready to move up and do it at a horse show. That's a little bit of a different answer, I think, than a lot of folks give, but that's the way I think of it, and that's worked well for me and my students.
Yeah, no, that's great. I've kind of like been on many different sides of it as a rider, like moving up to get my medals and just being like, if I can do half the movements on a good day, like let's just go for it, because I don't have any time and I need to get this done. And then now I'm way pickier because I'm hunting the higher scores and have a horse that can get a little nervous and stuff. And so it's definitely different for every horse and every rider, but that's some really good advice for.
And there's some horses sort of find the training level a bit too open. It gives them a little bit too much time to think about the world and be naughty, and I actually do a little better with a little more challenging test. Some horses overwhelmed by a more challenging test and need to stay at a lower level longer and gain the confidence in the ring. So I've seen both, and it's really about knowing your horse again, right?
Great. This is super interesting because I never thought to ask this question because one of my friends submitted it. It says, so there's many riders like want to ride conservatively just to make certain that they have a clean test without any mistakes, because they don't want to lose points on riding a movement too boldly and then making a mistake. But that of course in itself can lead to lower scores. And so what movements would you rather see a rider like take a risk on? And then which movements would you recommend riding more conservatively?
Very interesting question. So I think, you know, in terms of taking a risk, I think, you know, really the extensions and the mediums and, you know, lengthenings. Because those movements are really about risk. You know, we use the term bold or conservative, right? You know, that's where you should, you know, go for it a little bit. And there are times, you know, your horse is going to break to the canter, and that's sort of a part of the process of learning how much you can push. So don't go nuts with it, obviously. Like, don't, you know, push your horse beyond his, you know, balance level. But that is a place to like to see riders take a little more of the risk. I think the place to ride a little more conservatively is in the lateral work. So a lot of times, you know, you can score really well with you know, a steady, consistent shoulder in or a half pass, you know, where the bend is steady, the angle's steady, the balance is, you know, inconsistent. And then I'll see riders sort of, you know, wanting more. They want a little more angle or a little, you know, more impulsion, and they end up pushing the horse, you know, out of balance and lose that steadiness. Or you're like, oh, this is not quite enough angle, so halfway through you do more, and then you lose your line, right? So don't, you know, overthink it and you know, try to change too much within a single, you know, auto movement. You know, ride it for the steadiness and the consistency, and oftentimes you'll, you know, score better. And the next time, if you didn't like it, prep more in the corner, get the quality of the gait and the trot, you know, better for the second time you know, do that same movement in the test.
Interesting. I definitely have some interesting videos of me riding at first level, like hustling through a leg yield and seeing that the first half of the leg yield was actually quite good, and I should have stopped like bothering.
Common thing to, you know, override, and it usually gets worse instead of better. Not always, but usually.
Yeah, no, I've got some really beautiful video, like straight on, of just me ruining a perfectly good leg yield. As he's like, okay, I'll go, and then getting like a little, like varying the angle or getting a little bridle lame or something. Just like, oh, why did I do that? Great. And so are there any specific movements that you find yourself that you always feel like you're having to give low scores to? Or are there any movements that you just feel like people generally struggle with across the board that you'd like to point out, and hopefully people will practice a little bit more?
I think actually the biggest one that's sort of, you know, the middle level, so second through fourth, is the turn on the haunches and the walk pirouettes. So these are surprisingly hard to ride really well. You know, like, it's a movement that if you do ride really well, you can get big scores on, because again, it's fairly rare that we see them, you know, really well. But there's a lot of, you know, elements to it. It's really about the collection. There's a lot of ways for it, you know, to go wrong. And a lot of, you know, low-level riders don't quite, you know, understand, you know, the mechanics of it. You know, a good haunches in has sort of the feel. Sorry, a good turn on the haunches has the feel of both a haunches in, you know, and a shoulder in terms of, you know, it can be thought of as a haunches in on a small circle, but if you don't have the ability to turn and move the shoulder in the, you know, the way you would, you know, in the shoulder in, you're not going to have it, you know, either. And then it's at the walk, which is, you know, naturally, I think, the hardest gait, you have to keep, you know, activity and energy, right? So all those things, you know, together, it tends to really show if there's, you know, any holes in the horses or the riders schooling. Also, the riders learning this so often fall to the outside, right? You know, and then end up just essentially pushing the haunches out. So for the rider to control, you know, their body and all the elements, you know, of the horse is actually quite tricky, I think, for second and third level riders.
Yeah, definitely. I was expecting you to say that movement. And I was like, oh, I'd be really interested if this is not the turn on the haunches.
And I've taught, you know, like, I've taught entire lessons on this, right? Like, it's amazing how much, when you really start taking it apart, just how complex it is for someone learning it, you know, for the first time. Once you have it in your body, you can ride good ones on, you know, any horse. It's really, you know, a rider movement, right?
So then, just because we only have one more question, we've still got another few minutes. So first of all, if anyone else has other questions they want to put in the chat, they can, because we've got about 15 or so minutes left. But what would be your, like, and this may be a ridiculous question to ask because we're not anywhere near a horse, but what would be, you know, a common error that someone's making that could have kind of a quick fix if, you know, sit to the inside or put, you know, stop using so much of this aid or.
Sitting, not sitting in the middle is a big one, right? So riders who fall to be outside is amazingly common. And it does impact the horses, the straightness. Like you can really see it in like a lengthening up, alongside going, away from the judge, right? So really being aware of where your weight goes, in different movements, and like a lot of times that awareness is actually like enough alone to be able to fix that, right? A lot of riders just have no idea they're not sitting in the middle. Our bodies lie to us. They tell us we're in the in the center and we're not. So mirrors video, but it's the kind of thing that it can be fixed if you know it, right? And I'd say that's one that a lot of riders don't pay enough attention to, and it sort of haunts them in everything they do.
Great. Yes, I rode them like that for a very long time.
I did too. I think all riders who ride on their own with no mirrors end up crooked, and then we end up struggling with that for the rest of our lives. But again, just thinking about it is 2/3 of the battle, right? Being conscious of it, and the forces of the horse tend to throw us to the outside. Typical force, right? So if you just keep that in mind and really think about using the inside seat bone and weighting, evenly in your stirrups, it really makes, a big difference. Right?
Great. And so this is my last question. What is the biggest misconception that you feel like people have had about dressage judging, or even just dressage in general? I'll give an example that in the L program, learning that I've heard so many people saying that you can like get after a horse in the corners because it doesn't count because the judge is not judging you there. And they're gray areas. And that was one thing that right at the beginning of the program, they were drilling into us. There are absolutely no gray areas. You can't, there's no one spot where the judge is not staring at you, taking into account for your scores.
The judges are always, watching, and pretty much we see everything, right? There's all these tricks, do this with the sugar, this with that, and your judges are aware of all those tricks. We're all riders ourselves too. We know all those tricks, and it's like a rider who comes in the black gloves instead of white because they think it's again, if their noisy hands look quieter. It's not, because we know that most riders choose to wear black gloves because they're concerned about their hands, right? So just realize that we're pretty show ring wise. We all show ourselves, right? So you're not going to sort of slide stuff past us. That said, I would say that there's a thought that the judge is out to get me, or the judge doesn't like my horse or whatever, and that is not true, right? Like, we love to see really good rides. I love to give huge scores. There's nothing more fun than seeing a horse and a rider that are well matched, that are suitable for level, and I can give it a 80. That like makes my day, right? So that's really what and again, we're not doing this for the money or the fame or the riches. We're really doing this to help the riders. So look at your scores and comments, knowing that we do really have your best interests at heart. We're trying to help. We're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to be degrading or nasty. We're really on your side and want you to have as a good a ride as you can, right? I think another note too, we're all horse trainers. We understand that things happen and things go wrong and so on, and we want to see effective riding and effective training. We don't want you to sit there prettily and ignore what your horse is doing, right? We want you to react as a rider, as a trainer. You always be fair, always be kind. You never be rough or harsh, but know that you can and should ride your horse in the ring, right? You're training your horse every time you're on it, and that's true in the show ring as well as at home.
Great. Let me pull up the chat because Emily has a good question saying, how much do you pay attention to like what the rider is doing outside the ring? And actually, I've never heard this, Emily. I'm always scared to look too good in case things fall apart when we go down center line. And then the judge knows what we're really capable of. I would be afraid of like giving the judge a bad impression. I'm like, if I'm going to give the judge a bad impression, I want it when I'm coming out center line, not around the outside.
Honestly, the majority of the time, we're not looking at you. Right, we're still, we have our heads down and we're madly writing comments. So really, like, until the bell rings, odds are very good that you're not, being watched. But once I ring the bell, then my eyes are all on you. So for that 45 seconds, we are watching, right? And that's where, again, I don't care what the rider does, but we do start, to notice sort of what's the quality of the basics, right? Like, is this looking like a sit up and I'm going to give big scores, right? Or am I concerned already about some holes in the basics? Is the horse not going forward? Is the connection inconsistent? Is the rider sitting off to one side? Very important in that moment. This is not the other time to pick a fight, right? Keep it harmonious, be effective, but never be rough. Never ride with loud aids in that moment. You're, as soon as the whistle blows, you're sort of on stage and we are watching.
Great. And then another, sorry.
To the note of, don't be afraid to look too good around the outside, right? Look as good as you can, in that moment. Again, it sets a positive impression and we're smiling already as you're coming in and going, oh goody, it's going to be a test I can give huge scores to. So that's a good mindset to put the judge in, right?
Great. And then have you ever given a 10? And I'll add on what was it for and what made you think, wow, that's a 10?
I've given a number of 9s. I have to think if I've given a 10. Typically, I'd say the most common 10s are the free walk at the lower level. The horse with a really good walk, you look at it and you go, it couldn't be any better, and that's a 10. The other one is the halts, right? So if you come in, quality trot, halt, dead square on the bit, immobile, clean transition up, good connection, no issues in the mouth, etc., that's a 10, right? So I've seen that even, I think I've certainly given it some 9s at first level that, it's turn across and halts, right? So I'd say those are sort of the most common areas for 9s and 10s. I've also given a number of 9s on things like circles, lengthenings and, things like that, right? So if the quality of the horse and riders really high and we're seeing more and more of those, these days, some of these young horses can get 9s on pretty much everything in the test, right?
Oh, wow.
Obviously, all pieces have to be there, but it shouldn't be seen as like a, impossible bar.
Great. I'm gonna just see, we're like right at the end, and so if anyone else has any questions for Katy, go ahead and put them in the chat now. But unless anyone does, then we're right at the end. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on and chatting with us about judging and what we could do to, for those of us still riding, what we can do to practice so that when we go down center line, we're trying to get the judge excited to judge us versus.
We're all excited to hopefully get back in the show ring. I know I'm, itching as well as all of you. So we're all hanging in there, and hopefully in a few months we'll all be back out there doing it. So
yeah, definitely.
It's I think it's important for everybody to know too that the majority of judges are are riders and trainers themselves, right? So keep that in mind as well. Like I'll alternate in a month. I'll show twice and I'll judge once, right? we're in there doing it from both sides, and that's true for a huge number of us. Those that are not currently showed a lot when they were younger, right? So again, I think it's just important to know that we're all on the same side, right? It's all about the horses and the correctness of the training and making ourselves all better, right?
Great.
My ending note.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. This is really good for me too, because I've been slacking on studying for the L program because I've been a little like, wow, it's not happening anytime soon. So this is excellent. Well, yeah, this will be
You guys
the
are
end.
welcome to contact me on Facebook. I think I was tagged in Megan's post, so feel free to to message me if there's a question I didn't answer that you think of later. I'm happy to address that.
Great, that's awesome. Great, well, thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll be in contact with you at some point because I do still really need help with the PF work. He's getting it in hand though.
Since we can haul again, when we can
yes.
stuff. I know we're on a holding pattern. So
yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.